Russia may have just encountered one of the biggest strategic surprises of the war so far. Over the last several days, new battlefield developments have revealed how rapidly the conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues evolving. What initially appeared to be another routine phase of the war quickly transformed into something much larger as Ukrainian forces introduced new tactics, intensified long-range operations, and forced Russian commanders to adapt once again. Military analysts across Europe are now closely watching the situation because the latest developments may signal another major shift in the balance of the war. According to multiple reports, Ukrainian operations have increasingly focused on targeting logistics, supply routes, command centers, and military infrastructure far behind the front lines. Rather than relying purely on direct frontal assaults, Ukraine appears to be concentrating more heavily on disruption and attrition. This strategy is designed to slowly weaken Russia's operational capacity over time. For months, the war has increasingly evolved into a battle of endurance where both sides attempt to exhaust each other's resources, manpower, and industrial production capabilities. But recently, Ukraine's ability to strike deeper into Russian-controlled territory has started creating growing pressure on Moscow's military planning. Russian military bloggers and analysts have repeatedly expressed concern over the expanding range and sophistication of Ukrainian drone operations. In some regions, Russian air defenses have reportedly struggled to intercept every incoming target, especially during coordinated attacks involving multiple drones launched simultaneously. The psychological impact of these strikes is also becoming increasingly important. Unlike traditional battlefield combat concentrated near the front lines, long-range drone warfare creates uncertainty across much larger areas. Military facilities, oil depots, transportation hubs, and industrial sites deep behind the front can suddenly become vulnerable. This changes the entire perception of security inside the conflict. At the same time, Ukraine continues receiving military and intelligence support from Western allies. Advanced targeting systems, satellite intelligence, and modern surveillance capabilities have significantly improved Ukraine's ability to identify high-value Russian targets. Russia, however, is adapting as well. Moscow has accelerated defensive construction in several occupied regions while also expanding electronic warfare operations designed to interfere with Ukrainian drones and communication systems. Russian forces are increasingly dispersing equipment and ammunition depots to reduce vulnerability to precision strikes. Even so, the pace of technological adaptation inside the war remains extremely high. Military analysts now describe the conflict as one of the world's first large-scale drone wars, where both sides constantly experiment with new battlefield tactics in real time. Cheap FPV drones, long-range strike drones, electronic warfare systems, and AI-assisted targeting are all becoming central elements of modern warfare. The implications extend far beyond Ukraine itself. NATO countries are closely studying the war because many of the tactics being developed today could influence future military doctrine across Europe and beyond. Defense planners are particularly focused on how relatively low-cost drone systems are capable of threatening expensive military assets. This has already forced several countries to reconsider how future air defense systems should be designed. Meanwhile, the economic pressure of the war continues affecting both sides. Russia has managed to sustain high military production levels despite sanctions, but doing so requires enormous financial resources and industrial mobilization. Ukraine, on the other hand, remains heavily dependent on continued Western military aid to maintain defensive operations and replace equipment losses. As a result, time itself is becoming one of the most important weapons in the conflict. Both Russia and Ukraine appear convinced they can outlast the other side if they maintain enough pressure long enough. This means the war is increasingly becoming a contest of industrial capacity, political will, and technological adaptation rather than purely territorial gains. At the same time, civilian populations continue facing the consequences. Air raid sirens, infrastructure damage, blackouts, and long-range strikes have become part of everyday life across large parts of Ukraine. Russia has also experienced growing disruption in some regions due to Ukrainian drone attacks targeting strategic infrastructure. This growing escalation has raised fears that the conflict could continue intensifying throughout the coming months. Several analysts believe both sides are preparing for a prolonged phase of the war, where large-scale offensives become less important than sustained pressure through drones, missiles, sabotage operations, and infrastructure strikes. In many ways, the battlefield is no longer limited to trenches and front lines. Instead, the war increasingly extends deep into logistics networks, industrial systems, transportation routes, and energy infrastructure. For Ukraine, this strategy may represent one of the few realistic ways to offset Russia's larger population population and industrial advantages. By targeting weak points, slowing logistics, and creating uncertainty, Kiev hopes to gradually reduce Russia's ability to sustain offensive operations over time. Russia, meanwhile, continues attempting to maintain pressure through sheer scale. Mass drone attacks, missile barrages, and continuous artillery operations remain central components of Moscow's broader strategy. The Kremlin appears determined to convince both Ukraine and Western governments that prolonged resistance will eventually become unsustainable. But despite the enormous pressure, Ukraine continues adapting, and that adaptability may ultimately become one of the defining factors of the entire war. Before we finish, I want to hear your thoughts on this situation. Do you think Ukraine's evolving drone and long-range strike strategy can significantly change the course of the war? Or will Russia eventually overwhelm Ukraine through superior resources and production capacity? Leave your opinion down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest updates on Ukraine, Russia, NATO, and major global conflicts as they happen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next report.